There are people out there all across the country pushing boundaries to grow the game of golf. Like champion speed golfer Lauren Cup, who plays faster than anyone else. And Will Lowry, whose work in the golf community inspires more kids to get into the game. As a champion partner of the Masters, Bank of America supports everyone determined to find out what's possible. In golf and in life. What would you like the power to do? Bank of America. Bank of America N.A. member FDIC, copyright 2025, Bank of America Corporation, all rights reserved.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Hey, where you been? Buckeye Talk is about to begin. Hey, come on in.
Welcome into Buckeye Talk. I'm Stefan Krajisnik. That's Andrew Gillis. And Andrew, it is officially the off season. We've made it. We've made it through spring football. We made it through the 2024 season. We are officially in summer, even if it doesn't feel like it yet.
Well, we're officially in summer because Steven's on vacation.
That is true.
And he's not here. So yeah, this is what it's gonna be like. I'm taking a vacation in like a week or two. You're gonna be off at some point. Steven's off right now. So yeah, it's April 14th as we're recording this podcast, and it feels a little bit like summer school has started and we're kind of done with the school year. It's a very weird kind of world because we had been talking for so long. Hey, spring practice is on the horizon, and it went by in a blink of an eye.
Yeah, everything has been moving rapid speed. I think since like the playoff started, you know, we had that break between the Michigan game and the Tennessee game. That felt like it was 7 years long. But then the playoff went by so quick, and obviously, you know, spring ball, such a quick turnaround after the season ends. And then, you know, Ohio State went through spring ball relatively quickly. It was a week shorter than it typically is. And as Andrew mentioned, Steven decided that when summer arrives and spring ball ends, instead of waiting for warm weather to come to Columbus, he just went to Miami. So, which, by the way, we didn't give him a hard enough time. He spent all year calling us the Miami boys. And the first thing he did when he had an ounce of free time was head south to Miami. So
crazy. Absolutely crazy.
He's hanging out with Carson Beck right now, and he's not telling us. And that's fine. That's fine. He can keep secrets. It's what it does. Well, yeah, like we said, we're mentioning, or we're moving into off-season mode here. But before we did that, you know, we wanted to kind of look back on the spring game, and so much of our conversation, for those of you who listen to the live YouTube after the spring game or listen to the podcast after the fact, we talked a lot about the quarterbacks, and, you know, rightfully so. That's the conversation of the spring, and so much of this team's success is going to be determined by, you know, Julian Sayin probably, you know, prevailing in that competition and being, you know, a ready-to-go guy in year two of college football. But we wanted to kind of look back, and Andrew and I both rewatched the spring game on Sunday and before we started recording here on a Monday, just kind of trying to see some other guys who stood out, you know, some players that we didn't give enough love to. I think when we were talking about this podcast idea, the first name that like came to mind was, hey, when we record on Saturday after the game, we're probably not going to be talking a lot about Phillip Daniels and Ethan Owenyawa, just because, you know, the offensive line, you usually kind of have to rewatch to really get a grasp of how well some of those guys played. And so we did that. We went back, and we're going to kind of just go through here, name some guys that stood out, and at the end, we're going to do some spring game MVPs. Gillis, I'll go ahead and let you start. As you were going through your rewatch and really kind of honing in on this spring game, who's one guy that stood out where you were like, okay, maybe you did notice him on Saturday, but maybe when you rewatched it again, you were like, man, we didn't talk enough about this guy when we recorded after the game.
So this is the easiest layup to go first. We have to talk about Julian Sayin. I think when I watched back this spring game, there are certain moments where you kind of, your eyes deceive you a little bit. And, you know, not to sound like a football coach where it's like, I got to watch the film first. But like, you watch the game and you watch it unfold, and then sometimes you watch it back and go, well, that wasn't as bad as I thought, or well, that was actually a little worse than I thought. And the thing that impressed me with Julian was that it was about as good as I thought. Like, I watched it and I gave him an A, and you gave him an A, and we went, well, it was pretty good. And then I watched it actually this morning. I watched it on Monday before we got started here. So I was at an Elite 11 to see Brady Edmonds, and then I don't know if you heard this. There's some guy named Rory McIlroy who won the Masters. So I didn't get to do this until right before we do this. So I'm glad that we have, I'm glad that I have kind of a fresh mindset here. But yeah, I thought that Julian just looked crisp. Like, the thing that you really notice, especially like because we're way up there, and I'm not watching the entire game through my binoculars, and the thing that you notice when you're kind of have that camera view is just the way the ball explodes out of his hand is just different, and the way that it looks is just different. And I had that at the recruiting camp. Brady Edmonds, Ohio State's 2027 5-star commit. When he throws the football, it looks different than every other kid there. And that's no disrespect to every other kid there. It's just there's a reason why Brady Edmonds is, the number 1 or number 2 quarterback in the class. And it's because he looks different. And I thought Julian looked different. And I was curious if I was going to go in and maybe have that same idea, have that same concept of Julian, and I absolutely did. So, I think what we thought about the quarterback situation is exactly right. It's the Dennis Green line. They are who we thought they were, and Julian Sayin is who we thought he was.
Yeah, I thought Julian was great, even on the rewatch. He had one, I think it was to Jelani, like a quick out route that he threw that was so quick out of his hand and got there, so quick to the receiver. We talked a bit about his height with Ryan Day after the game. He was asked about it. I counted one batted ball, and it was actually a completion, oddly enough, for Julian Sayin. Got tipped at the line of scrimmage. I can't remember who caught it, but it seems like Ryan Day isn't too worried about that. He talked about, being able to play among the trees, and, there being a lot of guys with Julian Sayin's stature that have succeeded in the NFL. I think whenever you talk about, shorter quarterbacks, guys like Drew Brees and Russell Wilson are kind of the first names that come to mind of people who have been successful and won, Super Bowls at that height of stature. And maybe Julian Sayin's a little bit bigger than those guys, but it's going to be, somewhat of a learning curve, right? I think one thing that Ryan Day talked about as well was a lot of these kids, when they're not playing, high school games, they're just kind of doing 7-on-7. You're not dealing with, 6'4", 6'5", Jack Sawyer, I think, was around that height. Like, you're not dealing with those types of guys, at the line of scrimmage when you're doing those 7-on-7s. So for Sayin to kind of get these reps and learn kind of, how you maneuver, how you see over the offensive line, things like that, obviously going to be important. But yeah, like you said, I thought he looked good, man. Even on the rewatch, the ball just coming out of his hand, Denzel Burke talked about it at the combine of, like, not necessarily saying it reminded him of CJ Stroud, but almost saying it reminded him of CJ Stroud. If you watch some, side by side, I'm sure you would probably see some similarities in the way that Julian plays and CJ Stroud plays. So if you're an Ohio State fan who's excited about, his future as Ohio State starting quarterback, there's a lot of reason to be excited. He looked phenomenal in that spring game. I alluded to him there a little bit. One guy that kind of stood out to me on the rewatch and a little bit in real time was Jelani Thurman. And I think we saw a lot of him because we have to take into account that Will Kazmarek was injured, right? He was in a walking boot. Ryan Day said it's not a long-term concern. And I think we both agree that Will Kazmarek is still this team's number 2 tight end behind Max Clare. But Jelani looked good, man. Like, it looked smooth. I think there were times last year where the athleticism and all that, comes with what makes his potential. It didn't really look like smooth movement out there. It kind of looked like, when you're watching him, it was almost like he was thinking in real time as opposed to just going out there and doing. And I think in this spring game, he was kind of just out there flowing with the offense, getting open, making some plays. I thought he had a play one-on-one. It was a completion to Carnell Tate. I think it was a long completion to Carnell Tate from Sayin. And Jelani was one-on-one with Kenyatta Jackson and, like, pushed him like 5-10 yards up the field, like past the quarterback. if that's what he looks like, man, then maybe this is the year where that potential gets reached. I think it's benefited Jelani that we haven't talked a ton about him this offseason because there's not this mountain of pressure of when is he going to break through? When is he going to do it? We're talking about him like he's the third or fourth tight end on this roster, and maybe he is, on the depth chart ultimately, but the way he looked in the spring game, I worry that I'm going to start building some Jelani Thurman offseason hype, and we're going to do this again. And I was the one who said, when we did our tight end preview for the spring, that maybe I was just out, and I might be back in now.
Is Jelani just offensive CJ Hicks?
Yes, he is.
It feels like it's like, look, we are presenting this. I mean, this is the new guys of Buckeye Talk that are presenting this podcast today. If we ever do this, we should come up with a name for it. But you and I showed up in back-to-back seasons. My first season was 2023, yours was 2024. The first people that I heard about were like CJ Hicks and Sonny Styles in 2023. Oh, they're going to get unleashed this year. Oh, they're going to be, let go. And then Jelani Thurman on offense. Like, if you were to say, oh, the five guys that are primed for a breakout in both seasons, 2023 and 2024, CJ Hicks and Jelani Thurman. And I'm curious, how many of our listeners and texters, 614-350-3315, are listening to this right now going, why am I listening to two people who have covered a combined 3 seasons of Ohio State football tell me about Jelani Thurman? I don't need to hear any more about Jelani Thurman. And I'm kind of getting there. Like, I've said this on the pod before. I think CJ Hicks can have a really good year, but you got to show me. Like, you got to prove it to me at this point. I'm not going to buy any more stock on him because I've lost a lot of money, and I'm just not doing that with CJ. But with Jelani, you're right. And that's the thing that I'm kind of conflicted about. But flash to what degree, I guess, would be my question to you, because it's like, Will Kazmarek obviously didn't play, but how do we, does Jelani, is he on this list if Kazmarek plays?
I don't know.
Not. That's it. So I think that can mean two things. I think number one, it can mean the tight end room is in a really good place because we're going to get to somebody later who I have on my list. But yeah, Jelani, I really like the upside of, but I'm starting to get a little wary of, hey, every time we see this guy in a non-game setting, he looks good. But outside of that, I have questions.
The interesting part to me, the one-on-one with Kenyatta Jackson, just I can't get out of my head, because if he's blocking like that, then I think he can beat out Will Kazmarek or get reps over Will Kazmarek if he's doing that, right? Because that's what makes Will Kazmarek so special and so valuable to this team is the way he can block. If Jelani can do that, I think he enters a different conversation than maybe how we've talked about him in the past. It's if Steven was on the pod, we would be talking about how Ohio State is so deep at tight end, and do they need to be this deep at tight end because of how much they kind of utilize the position in the passing game? But we've seen the way they utilize them, at least in the blocking game, and Max Claire's got to grow in that sense. And if Will Kazmarek's doing it and Jelani Thurman's doing it, and we get to November and the blocking aspect of Max Claire's game maybe isn't there yet, maybe that's another opportunity for Jelani to get some snaps and get himself on the field. So I thought he looked good out there. When he catches the ball and the cameras pan to him and you see him standing next to a linebacker, you're just like, oh yeah, that's a massive tight end who could definitely play linebacker if he really wanted to. So he's fun to watch when things are clicking. So I do hope he has somewhat of the breakthrough season, because he's exciting to watch. The athleticism, the height, the size, everything about it makes him such an appealing prospect. I think Jimmy said, our columnist Jimmy Watkins said during the spring game, he was buying into the Max Claire hype, and we'll talk about Max in a little bit. But he pulled up a mock draft, and I think Jelani was higher on the consensus mock drafts than Max Claire. You can see why NFL teams, you can see why NFL teams are intrigued by Jelani, and if it starts to click, it's going to be scary. He's definitely my circle his name, and maybe in November admit that I overreacted to a spring game guy, but I liked what I saw. So who's next on your list of people that stood out?
Ohio State just had 2 NFL running backs leave, and Trayvon Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. And I made the case that Ohio State's 2025 running back room is not going to be as good because Trayvon and Quinshon were amazing. And it's nothing against C.J. Donaldson or James Peoples, but it's just so hard to replace guys that are that good. And again, they can still have a really good running back room, but I mean, my goodness, they just lost 2 stellar running backs. The 2026 room might be as good as the 2024 room was. And that is because Bo Jackson looks really, really good. I thought Bo Jackson ran really, really well. Ryan Day said this, that, he thought Bo got better as the spring went on. But Ohio State has to feel really good about where they're at running back right now with Peoples, with Donaldson, and then with Jackson. Jackson is your third running back. Man, I'm starting to think to myself, would I be surprised if we get to the Penn State game in early November and James Peoples is taking the first carry and then the first running back off the bench is Bo Jackson? I would not be surprised by that. And I think C.J. Donaldson can be pretty good. Bo just might be something different. Bo just might be, I'm not going to say Bo Jackson. I'm not going to say Lamar Jackson because his first name is Lamar and everybody calls him Bo. So, he's got a tough namesake to live up to.
The Lamar part of his name was brought up during the broadcast, and I think people in social media in real time were learning, and they were like, whoa, this is cool.
Well, some people don't subscribe to Buckeye Talk or subscribe to our text service because I had been telling people that for over a year. That by the way is going to be the Ryan Fitzpatrick went to Harvard.
Yep.
Matt Stafford and Clayton Kershaw were Little League teammates. It's going to be the fun fact that every broadcast brings up. So I'm just letting you Buckeye Talk listeners know now that every time Ohio State plays a game and Bo Jackson gets a carry, hey, did you know his nickname is Bo Jackson, one of the greatest running backs of all time, one of the greatest running backs.
Yeah. Gus Johnson's going to have a field day.
Oh my goodness!
With Lamar Bo Jackson.
His name is Lamar and Lamar Jackson, the MVP quarterback, and it's going to be crazy. So I'm just letting you guys know. We're giving you guys tomorrow's newspaper today that it's going to be annoying for you guys. But I think you'll get over it because Bo Jackson might be really, really, really good. So I have questions about his stats, but he looks explosive. And that to me was the big part of this. It's just confidence is so big for running backs, and he just looked explosive. I mean, I was so impressed rewatching him.
So I'm going to cheat here a little bit and just go ahead and name someone that was a little bit further down my list as a guy that stood out, and then we'll take our break. I'm adding Sam Williams-Dixon into this. And let's talk about this running back room as a whole. How many of these guys, let's say Bo Jackson, C.J. Donaldson, James Peoples, Sam Williams-Dixon, how many of them do you think would start in the Big Ten this year?
Oh, that's a good question. Bo Jackson, C.J. Donaldson, Sam Williams-Dixon, James Peoples. Donaldson's probably starting at most schools. Michigan, Jordan Marshall's going to be really good. Penn State, he's not there. Penn State, Michigan, no. Oregon, I have to check who they have coming back. But the answer is most, I think, for Donaldson. The answer is probably the lower level programs for Bo.
Yeah, I think for the other two, it's they're probably being more complimentary backs. They're probably maybe not the starter, but they're at least the number 2 guy.
There's still Minnesota. I think Minnesota still has that Darius Taylor kid.
Yeah.
And so Bo Jackson's not going to start over Darius Taylor. Darius Taylor is really, really good, but he's in the mix. He's the number 2 in that backfield.
He's just it's so quickly become such a deep room where I think they were deep. I mean, we're talking about, James Peoples, how good he was last year. It's just so hard to see the field. I keep going back to the point I was making before, as we were kind of getting through the spring of how are they going to divide the workload? James Peoples, let's say, he has as many carries as Travion did. But then the next guy, it's like, I think CJ Donaldson's going to get a ton, but I think you got to make room for Bo Jackson. And the explosiveness of Sam Williams-Dixon that we saw in the spring game makes him so intriguing too. Like, I like that he came back to Ohio State because there had to have been a market for him in the portal. And he came back, which tells me that Carlos Loughlin sees some kind of a role for him. And the way he played in the spring game kind of emphasizes that to me. It's a deep room. It's an intriguing room, and I think it's good because this group is going to be so fresh going into it. But I agree with you. I thought Bo Jackson looked awesome, which maybe that's why Sam Williams-Dixon stood out to me so much, because I'm like, geez, they're on their fourth running back, and he's still making plays. Like, they're so deep. Bo Jackson, if we were to go through a list of, winners from the spring, he's up there, right? Because Carlos Loughlin talked about him so much. Ryan Day has talked about him so much. And then we saw it kind of manifest in the spring game where they did use him a good amount, and he made plays. Like, at least out of the freshman class, you talk about Quincy Porter, talk about Devin Sanchez. Bo Jackson might be quickly rise up the depth chart, though, and probably deserves to be in that conversation. I mean, Devin Sanchez has a deep room to make it through still. Quincy Porter has a deep room to make it, to kind of get a big role. Bo Jackson's in that boat too, but the way he played in the spring game, the way Sam Williams-Dixon played in the spring game, this running back room is going to be very intriguing because I think you've got a bunch of guys who can do a bunch of different stuff, which is what Carlos Loughlin looks for when he recruits these guys.
Yeah, it is crazy that we are at a point of this Carlos Loughlin tenure. Like, he got hired 13 months ago, and right now we are talking about this. We were talking about this room, last January, going like, oh, I don't know. Like, we're kind of tugging at our shirt collars a little bit. Mm-hmm. And now we're at a point where I'm making the case that the running back room is not going to be as good as Quinshawn and Travion. And look, I don't know if that's necessarily a hot take or even like a warm take. I feel like that just might be what it is. But I still think we all are looking at this room going, they're going to be pretty flipping good. And not only are they going to be really good, the depth of this room is just comically impressive. Like, Bo Jackson as your third running back is genuinely nuts. And then you have Sam Williams-Dixon. Anthony Rogers is not even here yet. And he's a running back that people in Ohio State's building have compared to Noah Whittington at Oregon. And, because people, I think me included, when you first start reading him and you first start watching Rogers, you go, oh, well, 5'8", he's your gadget player. He's your slot receiver / running back / hybrid / you use him all over the field. But he's big. He's like 200 pounds. And like, he's going to show up in June. And this running back room is just absolutely loaded. So Carlos Loughlin's done a really, really great job. And I think that has been really impressive. And that was very evident on Saturday because, yeah, you could really like James Peoples. And I think James Peoples is going to be very, 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 very good. But the depth of this running back room is also just remarkably impressive.
Yeah, I like that. I think 2026, if James Peoples is what he is, what we think he is, and Ryan Day alluded to him being special was the word that he used. And then if we think Bo Jackson is what he is, I like the idea of 2026 maybe even being better than 2024. Got to get there. Both these guys got to kind of live up to some of the potential, but I like that. Let's go ahead and take our first break, and we'll come back here on Buckeye Talk.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Marvel Studios' Thunderbolts will take the world by storm.
There's some big right out there, and you're gonna help me stop it.
Us?
Why, you got someplace to be?
On May 2nd.
Avengers are gone. No one's coming to save the day.
Their time,
I think we could be the people that are coming.
has come. being a hero, there is no higher calling.
Let's do this.
Marvel Studios' Thunderbolts. Only theaters May 2nd. Get tickets now. This film is not yet rated.
And we're back here on Buckeye Talk, talking about the spring game, rewatching some players that stood out. As we're recording, the Buckeyes are actually in D.C. They're making their trip to the White House for the 2024 championship. They put out a picture, Andrew, of the whole team in front of the Lincoln Memorial. They visited the Lincoln Memorial before they went to the White House. I'm pretty sure J.D. Vance, I think, is doing something with the team. I don't know all the details, but they put out a picture at the Lincoln Memorial, the whole team with the trophy. Will Howard in a suit, I'm not saying he looks like a senator or like a president, but he looks like someone who would like play the president in a movie or like one of those tacky million TV shows that exist about like the White House. Like Designated Survivor, I could see Will Howard being the president.
Did you just compare Will Howard to Kiefer Sutherland?
I could see it.
Is that what you just did? Did you ever watch that show?
Designated Survivor, yeah.
I watched the first episode and I was like, this has promise, and I just never watched it again. But I could just imagine like Will Howard sitting there, like I forget what it was, a Cornell or Dartmouth or whatever shirt he had on at the beginning. He's just wearing a hoodie and like some room where he's supposed to be, the designated room. And I can just imagine like Will Howard just like sitting there in his Buckeye sweatshirt with like a national championship ring, and all of a sudden it's like, Will, you have to go save the world now. You have to go be the president.
All right, that's essentially what happened after they lost to Michigan.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, you mentioned Rory at the start of this podcast winning the Masters. There was a lot of overlap between like Rory and Ryan Day, just in terms of like their celebrations were so like weight off your back coded, more so than it was just like genuine celebration. Like it was like you could see when Ryan Day threw the headset, it reminded me of Rory just like dropping to his knees, being like, "Thank God this is over."
Yeah, like that was the cool part about those celebrations, because sometimes you see those things and it's like, this team's just going nuts because they won, right? And like I remember, I just graduated college, and my hometown team, my favorite team, the Washington Capitals, had just won the Stanley Cup, and they were like swimming in fountains in DC, and they were like, and they took the cup to a bar that just in DC, if you know it, it's Don Tito in Arlington, which is just a hilarious, like just a hilarious bar to take it to, and like rather than like an upscale, nice restaurant, this is just like a 20s bar that they just took it to, and it was great. And everybody was kind of pointing, these guys are going nuts because they won. It's like, well, yeah, but part of this is just relief. And I think you could see it in certain celebrations. Like, some teams win and it's like, this is great, whatever. And some teams win and it's like an element of finally. And yeah, I mean, Rory wanted to chuck his putter behind him as soon as he hit it. And I mean, props to him. Like one of the better tweets I saw was somebody like when he missed that putt on 18, somebody was like, you know what was going on inside of his head? Zombie Nation was playing inside Beaver Stadium when he missed that putt. And I was like, you know what? Maybe the Ryan Day Ohio State comparison is a little bit apt.
Yeah, there you go. So congratulations to Rory and Ryan Day on winning the Masters, and congrats to Ohio State on going to DC. Anyways, we'll continue with our regular scheduled programming of talking about the spring game, guys that stood out. Of course, get the text 614-350-3315. A ton of stuff coming up in recruiting that Gillis is going to be texting about. The scariest words in sports are looming. The transfer portal, the window is the spring window is coming up. We'll see what happens there. I think we expect Ohio State to at least add, as spots like defensive tackle and offensive tackle, maybe get a veteran quarterback in there. We'll see what happens exactly. But going back to the spring game conversation, another guy that I had on my list that I really liked, and this will be the first defensive guy we mentioned. We mentioned Julian Sayin. We mentioned Bo Jackson. We mentioned Jelani Thurman. We mentioned Sam Williams-Dixon. I thought Peyton Pierce looked the part of everything that we've heard, and Gillis is shaking his head because he definitely had him on the list. He looked like a veteran linebacker out there. Like he just looked comfortable. He looked like he wasn't he wasn't reacting. He was being proactive. He knew what was coming. He jumped, into gaps and lanes and laid some big hits. He had a pretty big hit on C.J. Donaldson. That was kind of like a, hey, new guy, welcome to Ohio State moment, even though C.J. Donaldson has plenty of experience playing at the power conference level. But we've just heard so much about Peyton Pierce, and he might be one of the most important second stringers on this roster just because you get so young, so quick at linebacker that if Arvell Reese or Sonny Styles misses a game like we saw Cody Simon miss a game last year, Peyton Pierce has to step up and be that guy and be a bit of a leader and a bit of a vocal presence in that room. And the way he played just tells me that he's comfortable kind of in his role in that room, playing for James Laurinaitis, playing in Matt Patricia's defense. We've heard Matt Patricia talk about him. James Laurinaitis has been so high on him. Ryan Day, again, has mentioned him. Like, it's like that Bo Jackson thing that we just talked about, where it's when all these people just keep bringing this guy up, you start paying attention, and then he starts making plays, and you're like, man, I see why they're talking about him all the time. Peyton Pierce, I thought, looked great. Listen, the defense was very, Ryan Day admitted that they were very vanilla in what they did. They didn't bring a lot of, like, blitz packages or change up the fronts. It was very 4-2-5 throughout most of it. There's not a lot of defensive guys on this list just because I don't really think there was many opportunities to make a ton of plays on defense. I mean, there was times where they weren't even really tackling. Right. So for Peyton Pierce to stand out, I think is notable. And I think he's one of those guys where I circle and I'm like, Arvell Reese was really important for this team last year. Peyton Pierce is going to be just as important for this team in 2025.
So after the spring game, for those that listened or watched on the live stream, Steven kind of hypothesized that Ohio State should run a 3-4. And Peyton Pierce might be the most important reason why. Like, obviously you're saying, well, CJ Hicks might just be better as a 3-4 edge or 3-4 outside linebacker, and Arvell Reese might be better as that. And can Caden McDonald do that? And is Edric Houston better at the 5? And Logan George might be, somebody who can fit that role. And you start to kind of map out guys who can fit it. But I don't know if he says that if Peyton Pierce does not look like Peyton Pierce. Now, I made the point, like, look, if you do run that, you're going to need to go to the portal and get some probably some veteran linebackers, because, that is a situation where, all right, well, if Sonny and Arvell and Peyton are on the field at the same time, James Laurinaitis came in at the spring going, we need a fourth. And, okay, is that Garrett Stover? Garrett Stover didn't play in the spring game, so, we're still kind of waiting to see what he can bring. And, okay, well then, do you feel comfortable with the freshman? Because you're too deep at that point might be Garrett Stover and then a true freshman or maybe two freshmen. And it's CJ Alford and Riley Pettijohn. It's like, all right, well, how do you feel about that? Well, the depth is a concern, and the reason why you feel that why you immediately go to the depth is because I feel like we all just kind of looked at Peyton Pierce and went, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, he's good enough to play. And yeah, Peyton was awesome. He looks physical coming downhill. He had that one play like early in the game. I forget who the running back was, but the running back was coming to the near side of the screen and Peyton just hit him. And it was kind of one of those plays where it was like, that was close to late hit out of bounds, but like Peyton's physical and he is not
CJ Donaldson ended up on the bench.
Yeah. Like Peyton can come downhill and hit you. So yeah, he was on my list. He was probably the next guy that I was going to bring up. He was very good. And I think Ohio State's linebacker riches are just going to continue because, like I mentioned, the 2026 room with the running backs. Man, Arvell Reese and Peyton Pierce in 2026? You're feeling great about that. How could you not? Yeah, Peyton Pierce, unbelievable.
Yeah, and Riley Pettijohn made a good play in the spring game as well. James Laurinaitis has done a great job recruiting this room and developing guys, to being able to do a lot of different things, being versatile. And I think Peyton Pierce is one of those. I'm very intrigued to see what his role looks like this year because I think it could be fun. I think he could be a guy who, he's not going to put up like all Big Ten level numbers because he's not going to play enough to do that. But he's going to have he's going to force a big fumble this year or get a big hit on someone that really changes the trajectory of a game. I like him. All right, who's another guy who stood out to you?
Wylan Graham.
Yeah. When you went the first one, you said this is the easiest layup of all layups, and you took Julian Sane. I thought you were actually going to say Mylan Graham.
Yeah,
it's crazy that we've gotten this deep without mentioning
it is
him.
crazy that we've gotten this far. It's an omission on our part. If Steven was on this podcast, if Steven is listening to this podcast, look, he's on vacation, so I don't know if he's going to listen to this podcast.
I don't think his girlfriend's letting him listen to Buckeye Talk.
If he is, he's somewhere screaming at his phone right now because we're 30 plus minutes into this and we haven't talked about Mylan Graham. But I'm going to now. It is very funny that we went through spring practice, and look, obviously practice is pretty much closed off for us too. You know, we don't really get to see a ton, but we get to see like 2 practices maybe, and Ohio State fans get to see little snippets, and people could start to say, oh, look, Garrett Wilson, look, number 5, haha, look at that comparison. And then they watch him play on TV, and they're like, oh, this is Garrett Wilson. This is exactly who we thought. And like, I saw a lot of fans saying Mylan Graham should be one of this team's starters. And, you know, like, I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know if that should happen, but I think that kind of proves that Mylan Graham is the best number 4 receiver in the country. And Stefan, you asked me, how would Ohio State's running backs split in the Big Ten? Like, would they, like, how many schools would they start at? Mylan Graham is a starter at every single one of them. Now, there are other good receivers in the Big Ten, so I'm not going to say he's the number 1 on every team. Like, Nick Marsh is also very good, but, like, at the very least, he's the number 2, and he's probably the number 1 on most every other team. And that's
he might not be the 4th best receiver at Ohio State.
He might not be the 4th best receiver at Ohio State. He was unbelievable. You see the way you see the body movement that he has, like the control that he has going into his second year. Like, it's really impressive with Mylan, and the route running. I mean, it's hard to tell on TV sometimes with, you know, the way that the camera is structured, kind of when these guys run down the field a little bit, but it looks smooth. It looks crisp. The way he goes and gets the ball. Mylan Graham's awesome. Mylan Graham is really, really good. And you start to wonder to yourself, like, okay, well, if you're going to go 4 wide, you're taking either a running back or Max Clare off the field. How do you do that? And if you're going to go, you know, 3 receivers, okay, well, Mylan Graham's not going to be on the field. So it is good that Ohio State has that problem, but Mylan Graham has created that problem for Ohio State.
I think that we both know that the value of the way Ryan Day talks about players, it's important. Like, he doesn't coach speak a ton, and he also doesn't gas up guys if they're not ready to be gassed up. Like, he is not going to overhype a player. And he talked about Mylan Graham having to, you know, still kind of grow in certain ways. He's got to get better at completing the catch. I think we saw that. There was obviously the play where it was just that awkward play where Aaron Scott fell and Mylan Graham was wide open and he dropped it, and it was just like a weird kind of lack of chemistry, kind of felt like, between Julian Sane and Mylan Graham, and that's going to come with time. And it was just a weird play. But there was also a play where he was going one-on-one with Aaron Scott, kind of a back shoulder play where I think he had his hands on it, and then Aaron Scott broke up the pass. And I think Ryan Day's kind of looking at that being like, he's very good. We've seen a lot of plays like that from Mylan where he kind of gets that back shoulder, he doesn't complete the catch. So that's an area where he's got to grow. But this is what Day said about Mylan afterward. He said, I think he has a bright future here. I think he has grown. He's gotten better. He's serious about his work. He knows what he has to work on, but he has all the tools it takes to be the next great one. And for a guy that's getting comparisons to Garrett Wilson, a guy who doesn't shy away, Mylan earlier this week was talking about, I don't know if it was earlier this week, maybe last week, was talking about the Garrett Wilson comparisons. He said, I understand how good he was and how much a legacy he left here, but at the end of the day, I just want to be my own person, not have to live in anybody else's shoes. So, like, he understands how good he can be. He kind of wants to leave his own legacy. Like, when you hear Ryan Day say the next great one, and you start talking about Jeremiah Smith and Marvin Harrison and Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jackson Smith and Jigba, whatever, whoever it may be, to be kind of thrown into that group already for someone who hasn't played really any meaningful football at Ohio State is crazy. He had 104 receiving yards in the spring game. I think his touchdown was 49 yards. Like, it's smooth, it's quick. And for a guy who didn't early enroll to be looking like this, through his first spring now, man, it is literally an embarrassment of riches what Ohio State has at wide receiver. Like, it can't be overstated enough. I'll move on to my next guy then. I'm actually going to stay on the defensive side of the ball. Some of this is because Ryan Day talked about him after the spring game. Some of it is because I think he made a few plays in the spring game. I'm not talking about him because I thought he was just outstanding on Saturday. But I walk out of the spring game thinking that Logan George is really intriguing to me. And finding out exactly what Ohio State wants to do with him. And maybe when they change up the defensive fronts, there's different roles. Maybe he's one of those guys that could benefit from a bunch of different looks up front. But I just can't get over seeing him when we were in Atlanta for the national championship game. We had a bit of an open practice session, and he was there with the team. And his size was just so... When he was standing next to Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau, I was like, he's a lot smaller than those guys, it looks like. And the way that he's kind of worked on his body this offseason and the way that he looked in the spring game, I'm starting to buy in maybe a bit more than I initially thought when I saw kind of undersized guy from the FCS was kind of my first impression of him. And I'm coming around on what he could be. He had a few plays in the running game that I thought were really impressive. He got in the backfield a little bit, and there's only so much you can take away from a scrimmage where, you can't actually hit the quarterback, but I'm starting to see what Larry Johnson saw in this guy. I'm starting to see what, Jim Knowles at the time and now Matt Patricia, see in this guy. And another guy that when Ryan Day talks about him highly, you kind of listen. So are you with me? Are you buying in on Logan George a bit more? I think we've talked so much about CJ Hicks kind of as the third guy at defensive end where maybe he's the fourth guy. Maybe Logan George is the third best guy.
And maybe CJ Hicks is a little bit more of a Mitchell Melton where it's just kind of a situational pass rusher because Logan George is there, right? And yeah, Logan to me is one of those guys where you look at him and you're not going to say, I don't think right now he's going to start over Caden Curry or Kenyatta Jackson. Like, I don't think he's going to go into that lineup and just be like, yeah, this is my job now. I don't think we're there. I don't think I watched that spring game and watched it back, but I think I watched that spring game and kind of had a similar thought to you where I just went, they got something here. I don't know to what end, but something. And I don't know if this is going to be a 10-sack guy who, comes in and dominates or is, some of the defensive ends that Ohio State has had in recent years. But Logan George just might be a really good contributor, and you need those guys. And you need those guys, especially at that position, because, Stefan, I don't know about your list, but I didn't have any defensive tackles on it. And I think Caden McDonald and Andrew Houston are really good, but obviously we know where this team's kind of needs are in the portal. I mentioned I am curious about the upside, and I am a little bit worried about the upside of this defensive end group. But I think Logan George definitely does enough to give you some confidence that the room can be solid enough. Now, is that acceptable for some people? Maybe. I don't know. But Logan George, I thought, played really well. And Logan George it feels like he's progressively getting better, and I'm excited to see what he looks like when we get to August.
Yeah, I think one thing that's kind of interesting with him, too, is in losing Jack Sawyer and JT, you lost two guys who were also really good in the running game at defensive end. And that's not to say that Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson can't be that. But I like the idea of going out and getting a defensive end who, like I said, it's at the FCS level, but he wasn't just compiling a bunch of sacks. He was, the stat that stood out was he had like 18 tackles for loss or whatever it was. Like that's intriguing. That tells me that's a guy who can factor into, slowing down a running game a bit. And I think we saw glimpses of that. Before you name your last guy that stood out, let's talk about defensive tackle a little bit. We're going to talk about them tomorrow's pod when we talk about positions that they need to get in the transfer portal. I'm sure defensive tackle is going to come up. I struggle. Well, was the last guy you named, is it going to be an offensive lineman?
No, actually.
Okay, then we can have this conversation. I didn't want to ruin if you were going to talk about someone. I go back and forth on if I think Gabe Van Sickle played really well in the spring game or if this defensive tackle depth is like a problem.
Dude, I had that same problem, and I was ready to say Austin Sareveld, but I was like, is that just a spring practice kind of, lifetime achievement award that you're giving it to Sareveld for?
They actually in DC, they just gave him a Medal of Honor for what he's done this spring.
Right, exactly. But it's like, yeah, is that? I didn't know how to weight that. And individual players that stood out, you watch it back, and like, frankly, I thought about it, and I was like, I could just do what I did in one of those videos that we did after the spring game and say Tyler Bowen, because while the defensive tackles, I don't think held up against the run at all, and while I don't think the entire defensive line really held up against the run at all, every single time they ran the ball, it was fitted up. Like, there were just moments where the defensive line was getting blown off the ball, but more importantly, it was man on man. It was every offensive line coach's dream looking at that. Get low, fire off, hat on a hat. That's what it was. Everybody was accounted for. Every offensive lineman was blocking somebody. Every defensive lineman was blocked. And I remember looking at that going, I don't know how I'm supposed to stand out. Like, you pointed this out during the game. Luke Montgomery had a nice pull where it was a play action fake, and he pulled out to the right and blocked CJ and kind of kept him off of Julian. And there were certain moments, but like, the entire offensive line just played really well. And I kind of was like trying to figure out how I could talk about the offensive line. So I'm glad you did this, because I think if you want to just say the entire offensive line, the entire two deep of the offensive line, you can. Yeah. And I think if you want to say who stood out in a bad way, I thought Cade McDonald and Edric Houston were fine, but outside of that, I was not impressed.
Yeah. This exercise, the point of this exercise was talking about Ethan Owanyama and Philip Daniels, and we're not going to mention either of them apparently. So let's just do that now. I thought Philip Daniels, there was a drive where he was going against CJ Hicks, and Philip Daniels was throwing him to the ground.
Yeah,
and it's just one of those things where it's like, am I hesitant now about exactly what CJ can do, or am I starting to get more excited about Philip Daniels? It's chicken or the egg. Like, we can go. That's what happens in these spring games. Also, like, the offensive line didn't have to think about, a designed like blitz or like disguised blitz or something like that. Like that changes everything, right? But the offensive line looked good, like you said. The whole two deep looked good. I thought Gabe Van Sickle looked good. I thought Josh Padilla looked good when we saw him out there. So we'll see. I think you can have both observations of depth on the defensive line is a problem and depth on the offensive line is really good. Like, I think both those things can be true, right? Because if the offensive line has struggled, we'd come in here saying, okay, maybe the defensive line depth is like, maybe a guy like, let's say Will Smith had a great spring game. We'd be saying, okay, like maybe defensive tackle depth isn't so bad, but we would also be saying, oh, okay, offensive line didn't look particularly great. So I guess both things can be true, but yeah, shout out to Gabe Van Sickle, Philip Daniels. I thought what did you think of Ethan Owanyama? I thought there was good. I thought there was shaky.
Yeah,
there's just room to grow there, I guess.
You see the flashes,
right,
and you see the vision, right? Like, sometimes somebody's talking to you and they're trying to sell you on an idea, whether it's a football player or not. It's just like trying to tell you something and they're trying to convince you something, and you're like, I see where you're getting at. And you see that with Ethan and Yanwa. You're like, I see what you're getting at. And I think that when you watch him play, that size is going to be a benefit. And I asked him this like a week or two ago. I said, because he said he dropped 30 pounds. And I said, have you gotten used to playing at that? And he goes, oh yeah, immediately. I'm skeptical. I'm going to throw my challenge flag on that one. Not just because I'm not saying he was just like lying. Oh, he's lying. I think he needs a summer of okay, now let's build on that. Okay, now let's stick at that weight and let's get stronger. Let's get more agile. Let's keep him here and let's play with this. I think if I were to rank players who I'm most excited to see in fall camp, Anyan was probably number one because he's going to be this team's starting left tackle, it looks like. And there were moments where it looked like he struggled with speed a little bit, but again, I think this is a up and down kind of progression where success is not linear, and I think we're going to get to fall camp and we're going to see a much more linear progression.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, we've done our honorable mentions now, so name your last guy. The last guy you're going to name who stood out, and then we'll take one more break.
Max Clare. Max Clare is the mother of all safety blankets. Like, you know, Steven and I have kind of debated this, and Steven and Jimmy and I debated this in the press box on Saturday. And we can keep going back. How much should you use the tight ends? And how important are the tight ends to Ohio State? Because they have these guys, and they're known as receivers, and they have a lot of them, and they're all very good, and blah, blah, blah. I get it. However, the tight end is pretty much a universal safety check and check down for the quarterback. And when you have receivers like that are going to command attention, the middle of the field is going to be wide open. And we saw that with a touchdown to Max Clare, and Max Clare caught a seam route and scored. And I don't know if he's going to end up. Somebody pointed out, one of our texters said that the broadcast said he was going to have 50 catches this year. 50 is probably a little too high, but whatever he gets, like there could be games that I think Max Clare could have where he goes, 3 for 29, and they're just the most important 3 for 29 you've ever seen. Like, if Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis and Mylan Graham and Quincy Porter and all these other receivers, Bryson Rogers on the outside, kind of take care of their business as they're going to do, Max Clare over the middle is just going to be a nightmare. Because if you're going to double Jeremiah, somebody's getting singled up. And yeah, it's going to be Carnell Tate, but there's going to be times where you have Max Clare on some poor linebacker, on some dude who just has no concept of how to cover. And Ohio State is going to be able to feast on that. Now, could you capitalize on that a little bit? Maybe, but man, Max was awesome. I am very impressed with Max Clare, and I think that it's going to be one of those things where you might not rely on him, but when you need to rely on him, he's going to be reliable, if that makes sense.
Jeremiah Smith, I think, is going to lead this team in touchdown catches. I wouldn't be surprised if Max Clare is second. And maybe he ranks fourth in receptions, but is second in touchdowns. He's going to be a red zone weapon for this team, especially over the middle of the field, like you said, with these receivers, especially with how comfortable Julian Sayin is throwing over the middle of the field and how much he kind of leans on that area right now. It's going to be interesting. I liked what I saw from Max Clare. I was leaning more. I'm more on Steven's side of I think 30 is kind of the number you guys debate. Is it going to be over under 30 receptions? I've leaned on Steven's side. And I'm starting to come around on the idea a bit more. Just because of young quarterback, safety blanket, this guy's really freaking good. That's its own thing. They leaned on him a lot in the spring game. That was interesting to me. The Julian Sayin leaned on him a lot in the spring game. So I don't like it. Also, I will say on Max Clare's touchdown, I do wish we were a bit more live. He might have still scored. He would have gotten lit up.
I said, that's a targeting penalty. That's a targeting penalty if I've ever seen one.
That's exactly what would have happened. We would have spent about 10 minutes waiting for a review after that play. But okay, I like it. So here's the guys that we named as people who stood out: quarterback Julian Sayin, tight end Jelani Thurman, running back Bo Jackson, running back Sam Williams-Dixon, linebacker Peyton Pierce, wide receiver Mylan Graham. Sorry, Steven, it took so long to talk about a receiver. Defensive end Logan George, and tight end Max Clare. All guys that we thought kind of stood out in the spring game. Obviously, a bunch of other guys had moments, showed spurts. Fahim Delane, probably a guy we should mention, got an interception. as a freshman. So we're going to take one more break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to name our MVP. Andrew once, me once. We're going to name our MVPs for the Ohio State spring game.
Spring is here, and you can now get almost anything you need for your sunny days delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parmesan delivered. A cabana? That's a no. But a banana? That's a yes. A nice tan? Sorry, nope. But a box fan? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details.
Sergeant and Mr. Smith, you're gonna love this house.
Bunk beds in a closet?
There's no field manual for finding the right home. But when you do, USAA Homeowners Insurance can help protect it the right way. Restrictions apply.
And we're back here on Buckeye Talk, wrapping up some conversation about the spring game. Just a programming note. So Steven's not going to be back until the Friday podcast. As we mentioned, he's on vacation right now. So you're getting this today on Tuesday, talking about the spring game. We're going to do a pod on Wednesday about the transfer portal opening, places that we think Ohio State could maybe address some things, fill some needs. The window opens, I believe, on the 16th. So as you listen to that pod on Wednesday, there might be some guys already announcing their intentions of entering the portal, might already be in the portal. So we'll see what happens there. And then on Thursday, and Andrew and I are going to do a recruiting pod. This is the time to get the text, 614-350-3315, 2-week free trial. You really should try it out because Gillis he's all over the state, all over the place with these camps and whatnot coming up throughout, May and June and into the summer. As he had mentioned earlier on his pod, he already watched Brady Edmonds on Sunday, the day after the spring game. There's just a ton. It's a lot of moving parts right now. You really should get the text 614-350-3315. The biggest news so far, we'll do our MVPs here in a second. The biggest news from Ohio State's trip to the White House, Nina Day has come out on social media and said that Ryan Day does not dye his beard. We're at that point of the offseason officially. We were celebrating summer being here. We're at the point where there's a media personality who I don't know what the context is, but the clip is just like 2 minutes of him ragging on why you shouldn't trust Ryan Day because he dyes his beard. And would you trust Santa Claus if he dyed his beard?
Good God.
Part of me wants to listen to the whole episode to know, like, how did you get to that point on April 13th? But anyways, that's what Nina Day had to say. She's come out and I think the word she used was enough with this narrative, basically. Our national question has been answered.
I had this thought the other day, which is not really related to that point, but you said we're at that point of the offseason. The offseason's half over. Ohio State's last game was 3 months ago, January 20th, a little over 3 or a little under 3 months ago. And then Big Ten Media Day is the third week of July. Like, we're here. Like, we're kind of smack dab in the middle of the offseason, and it's crazy that we're already here. It feels like Ohio, like, you could convince me that Ohio State Notre Dame national championship game happened a year ago, or you could convince me it happened 2 weeks ago. It's just everything has been such a blur since we got back because we really only had February where there wasn't a ton going on, and even still there was a ton of news, there was a ton of portal stuff, there was a ton of just kind of coaching stuff and recruiting stuff, and we get to March and spring ball, and then now we're here. It goes by too fast.
So the NFL draft is coming up here in about 2 weeks. We're at the point of the NFL draft where, like, the crazy headlines are kind of gone. Like, I think we're at the point where, mock drafts and hypotheticals are all getting kind of, dwindled down. Like, it's no more, we're not seeing, this random quarterback who wasn't that great. Could he go second to the Browns? Like, we're not, it's starting to settle a bit where it's like, Shedeur and Cam are kind of, separating themselves. Abdul Carter, there was a conversation about his injury. It sounds like his physical and all that has been looking better. Like, the NFL draft crazy headlines have started to die down. Now it's like full go college football crazy headlines. And Nico Iamaleava has helped, produce some takes and some opinions. That's certainly helping spark up some things. But we're at the point where like Penn State's gonna start getting some national championship predictions. We're at that point. We're like, this is the year for Penn State. It's coming. So be ready. We're at the point of, is Miami back? And we know they're not back. But like this is the time of the offseason. So I like it. It gets us through the next few months before we can actually watch some football.
How do you feel about weddings on college football Saturday?
Yeah, we're coming up on that.
How do you feel about Notre Dame independence?
Save the dates are starting to come out probably pretty soon here for fall weddings. That'll spark some debates.
Oh, the worst. This is
the good life. This is the good life. All right, back to spring game. We're going to name our MVPs before we wrap up. I'll let you go first. Who is your MVP from Ohio State spring game?
I have to say Julian Sand, because I look at a lot of other people on this roster and I say, who obviously played well, but who maybe solidified their position the most? And like, I think Mylan Graham made a move to demand more playing time. I think Max Clare certainly, kind of showcased why Ohio State went out and got him. I think Logan George demanded more playing time. I think like Bo Jackson demanded more. Like, there are guys that you went through and are like, you know what, they played really well, and you feel really good about them. I don't know anybody who really cemented their status like Julian Sand. Like Julian, I think we all came in kind of thinking he's the starter, but we'll see. And Lincoln had been playing well, and he had been practicing pretty well, and we saw that spring practice or the spring student appreciation day practice like a week before, and Lincoln was the better quarterback that day. And then you watch it on the big stage, and it looks so much different, and you start to see the reasons. Okay, well, this is what Julian was kind of promised, and this is where we thought it was going to go. So I think it's Julian. I thought he was really good, but more importantly, I kind of think he was the guy that maybe solidified his position maybe a little bit more than anybody else, because imagine the place we would be, Stefan, if Julian Sand went out and laid a clunker and was just bad. Like, this podcast might not have been who stood out in the spring game. This podcast might have been how in trouble is Ohio State at quarterback if none of their quarterbacks look good. And the nightmare that would have been happening on social media from Ohio State fans, and, the nightmare that would have happened in, kind of our minds of just like, oh my God, like, is Julian that guy right now? Is it Lincoln? There would have just been so many more questions. And for Lincoln to come out, for Julian to come out and kind of smash those questions and kind of smash those doubts, I thought was pretty impressive. So to me, it's Julian. I thought for a lot of different reasons, he's the guy.
A good spring game was so important for him just because we had seen 2 full practices throughout the spring before that, and he didn't look great. And I think we were telling ourselves, like, okay, we've seen 2 out of 14 practices. He could have had 12 good practices and 2 bad ones. Like, that's fine. If he had 3 bad performances and 3 open practices, it would have been kind of hard to come back from that, at least in terms of off-season debates and discussions and whatnot. He needed a good spring game, and I thought he delivered. I don't think that's a bad choice. I will go with Mylan Graham. I don't know, how much he kind of solidified a spot in this receiver room, just because I do think Bryson Rogers is good. Quincy Porter is still good. The 3 starters are so good. Like, it's a loaded room. It's going to be hard to, get a significant playing time. Even Brandon Innes, you tell yourself he played a ton last year, but you look at the numbers, it really still wasn't that much. It's going to be hard to crack playing time, especially with Max Clare now being, part of this conversation too. But for the future of the room, not that we ever really had doubts about Ohio State's future at wide receiver, because guess what? There's another 5-star coming in next year, and there'll be another one the year after that, and the year after that, and the year. As long as Brian Harline's here, they're going to have 5-star receivers, and they're going to be successful. But it was good to see the guy who's getting those comparisons kind of come out and put on a show. It really was funny watching that touchdown that he caught, and he's running over the middle of the field. Like, your brain immediately was like, oh, that's Garrett Wilson. And it's like, oh, wait, no, it's not. But, close enough. So the Stephen Means tribute to wide receiver MVP award goes to Mylan Graham for his showing in the spring game. Any last thoughts on the spring game? Because I don't think we're going to talk too much more about it as we move on this offseason.
Kind of sad that the spring game feels like it's losing its importance, because it felt like for so long, like for the spring in college football, it used to be, here's where we find out how tough our team is, and guys are throwing up in trash cans around the facility, and it's like this is where we really kind of, this is where we really separate them, and the men from the boys, and it's like, all right, well, the spring game, like Steven brought up the fact that the losers used to have to remulch Buckeye Grove, and there were stakes to this. And now it did you go back and look at that play that Jeremiah Smith, he caught that pass over the middle of the field? Yep. There's never been a quicker whistle in football history. Look, I'm not saying that they're wrong for doing this. That's 100% the way you got to do it, but it is, you watch it and you start to think and you start to wonder, it feels like spring games mattered more 10 years ago. It feels like there was more at stake, more on the line, and you learned more 10 years ago.
Yeah, I thought it was the right move. I mean, this team played
and I'm not saying it was wrong. That
less than 3 months ago, you don't need Jeremiah Smith, getting lit up by a linebacker or something like that. I 100% agree. But when you do that, you're going to get 40,000 at the spring game instead of 80,000. The 40,000 was the smallest crowd since the 2021 spring game. They had 19,000 that year, but that was because of COVID restrictions. So then if you take out COVID restrictions, it was the smallest crowd since 2013 when the game was in Cincinnati. So if we're looking no COVID restrictions, spring game played in Columbus, it was the smallest crowd since 2005 when they had about 23,000. So, yeah, I mean, it's just I honestly almost want to give Ohio State credit for doing something, because there's schools like Nebraska that just aren't doing it at all.
Did you see the Oklahoma spring game? There was nobody there. There was one of those empty crowd things. You would have thought it was 34 degrees and raining and wintry mixing. It was terrible. And I'm not blaming fans. I think it's lazy and tired when people in our position blame fans.
Yeah, I think 40,000 in spring is still very impressive.
40,000 for a spring game is it's a gorgeous day. Go out and see the Buckeyes. They did the national championship ring. They did the banner and they didn't do the banner, but they did the championship team honoring at midfield. It was a cool day, but it is unique the way that spring games have kind of changed. And I did think that as I was watching this, because it just I saw it on Twitter while I was leaving. Notre Dame started their spring game with a 7-on-7 period. These spring games are just different now, and credit to like you said, credit to Ohio State for doing something.
Yeah. It's sports changing, things are changing, and we all want the playoff. We want more games. You can never have too many games. This is maybe just one of the results. It is what it is. I'm fine getting Ohio State and Notre Dame in late January if it means sacrificing, the quality of a spring game. So, and I'm 100% with you. If you're a fan who doesn't feel like going to a spring game, I'm not going to blame you, because that's just it's changed. And it's also the tickets to these spring games aren't expensive. But if you don't live in Columbus, man, it's a drive you got to make. It's a trip you got to make. You got to get a hotel if you want. Whatever. There's a lot that goes into it.
It's not for the spring game.
College football programs and college athletic departments are asking a lot of fans, because they want you to donate so they could do facilities. They want you to donate for NIL. They want you to pay tickets, and tickets aren't getting cheaper. And so I get it. I don't blame fans. It's just what the spring games have become. So, but that was fun. That was fun. I'm glad we did that to kind of be able to talk about things that were non-quarterback, even though your MVP was a quarterback. Defeated the whole purpose of this podcast. But we'll be talking a ton as the offseason moves on. Like I said, a couple more pods. It'll just be Andrew and I. Steven will be back for the Friday pod. We're going to talk portal. We're going to talk recruiting. Make sure to get the text, because that's where we're going to go first with any portal news that breaks, any recruiting news that breaks, whatever it may be throughout these next few weeks, next few months, as Ohio State prepares for its week 1 matchup with Texas on August 30th. Get the text 614-350-3315. From Andrew Gillis, I'm Stefan Krajisnik.